Today we will be talking about harnessing the networks of your podcast guests and audiences. Nice, fun, long title, but lots of really good information in there. That's going to be with Kelsey Jones, who is our executive editor at SEJ and who also is a marketing consultant at moxie.com. My name is Brent Satoris. I'm going to be the moderator today, but I'm going to let Kelsey just do a quick introduction about herself in case you don't know about her already. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Thanks, Brent. As Brent mentioned, I'm the executive editor of SEJ. I have about 7 years in marketing and PR, about 11 years, which seems crazy now, of journalism and editing experience. At SEJ, I handle our entire content strategy, and then I also manage our Marketing Nerds podcast, and it averages over 5,000 downloads per month.
So I'm going to run through some basic housekeeping stuff just so you guys understand kind of how these webinars work. If during the webinar at any time you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you feel is okay to say publicly, you're welcome to utilize the hashtag SEJ Think Tank on Twitter. That tends to be where we focus a lot of our monitoring on Twitter. So again, the hashtag is SEJ Think Tank. You also have a question box within webinar. The GoToMeeting webinar system that you can ask questions down there, and we'll monitor that and give you answers as well. Throughout the presentation, we're going to have 2 poll questions today. This is your opportunity to have a voice, participate, and it's our way to make sure you're paying attention. So we'll run 2 polls throughout the presentation. We'll do our best. As Kelsey mentions, various different resources or links or subject matters to link them both in the webinar itself and also on Twitter. If we miss something, just let us know and we'll make sure we get it to you. After the webinar is over, we're gonna have a quick 5-minute survey. It really helps us a lot if you can stick around just for that couple minutes and run through the survey. It's not super long and it helps us to make these better. And then lastly, the entire webinar. All the resources, an entire write-up will be done and published on search engine journals. So you will be able to go back, re-watch it, review the notes, share it, et cetera, et cetera. So without any further ado, Kelsey, go ahead and jump in.
Great, thanks, Brent. I want to thank everyone for joining me too. I know a lot of people, me included, are a little distracted with the new Star Wars movie coming out. So thank you guys for joining me. It's a little cold here in Kansas, so I know it's harder to get motivated with attending webinars. So thanks for joining us today. So like Brent mentioned, I'm going to talk about the networks of your podcast guests and audiences. And so first, I kind of want to define what a guest is and what your audience is. So for the purpose of this presentation, a podcast guest is someone that you have on your podcast. And then your audience, of course, is the listening audience who is sharing and listening to your podcast on a regular basis. So here's some reasons why you should care specifically about the networks of these 2 groups of people, your podcast guests and your podcast audiences. First thing is birds of a feather flock together. So the people that you want to listen to your podcast who are already listening, they're going to have friends and colleagues that are like them. So they're going to then become your target audience as well. Same with the guests. If you have high quality guests on, more than likely they're going to have people in their network that would make good guests for your podcast as well. So it's important to think about that and target them. It's also going to help you build community, which is really how a lot of podcasts become so popular, through organic reach. And so building that community of people that are interested in your podcast and want to know what you have to say, the subject matter, that all goes into community building, which is really important for podcasts. Thirdly, organic growth, which I kind of touched on. Podcasts do really well through word of mouth, and so it's kind of like a TV show. People say, oh my God, if you listen to this amazing podcast, you have to check it out. Let me send you the link. And so focusing on the networks that are going to be sharing your podcast is really important. And then finally, when me and Brent did our run-through, he brought up this really good point. Not a ton of people are actually thinking about this. They're thinking about, promotion from the front end and not thinking about capitalizing on the networks that they already have access to. So that's going to put you ahead of the game when it comes to building and managing your podcast. So before we continue, we have a poll question that Brent is going to go over.
All right, so I'm going to throw this up, and so everybody can vote on it real quick. It's a simple one, get you started. Do you have a podcast? No. No, but I'm planning on it someday when I get around to it. I threw that in. And lastly, yes, I do have one. Again, no, but I'm planning on it, or yes. I'm going to give people just a little bit of a minute or two to kind of throw some votes up there. If you don't mind, just cast your vote real quick, and then we'll close this out. Couple seconds more. All right. All right, so you can see, I'm actually surprised that 27% have a podcast. To be honest, that seems like an impressive number for where we are in the space. So that's kind of a positive thing right there.
Yeah, and it shows that people are wanting to do more when it comes to comes to building their network, which is what I touched on, getting ahead. So that's a good thing. Thanks, Brent. So let's move forward and talk about leveraging your guest network, so the people that are on your podcast. There's a few strategies you can use to leverage those networks and make sure that your guests are talking about and sharing your podcast. The easiest thing that I found is offering click-to-tweets for guests. So that's a free service. They offer paid accounts as well, but click-to-tweet.com. And so basically what you do is you go to the site, you write a tweet out, and then it's going to, click-to-tweet is going to send you a shortened link that when you send it to someone and they click on the link, it automatically goes to twitter.com and fills in the tweet that you provided. So literally all they have to do is click once on the shortened link and then once on the tweet button, and the podcast is tweeted. So this is something I've been doing with a lot of my podcast guests that I have on Marketing Nerds whenever I'm hosting. I know Brent hosts a lot, and so we try to get the word out there through these click-to-tweets to make it really easy for our guests to share the episodes once they're live. Excuse me. So here's an example. I did a podcast with Jim Banks of Cheapo Flights, and we talked about PPC, and so once the episode was live, I shot him this email, and as you can see, I thank him for joining me, and then I send him 2 click-to-tweets. So what I like doing is showing the full tweet first, so he knows what he is clicking on, because I know that shortened link looks a little shady. It's ctts.ec, and so I know that people like knowing what they're going to click on. So I offer 2 options. This only took me 5 minutes or less to write, really easy. Again, thank him for his time and say see you at PubCon. And so I have found that when I send these types of emails, I would say 80 to 90% of the guests end up using one of these links. And it's always awesome when they do, because you see it on their Twitter account and you know that you made it really easy for them to share. They could do it instantly instead of just sending them the URL and they'd have to come up with a tweet on their own. Along that same line, you also want to send the guests a link when the episode is published. So even if you're not sending the click-to-tweets, you want to send them the link as soon as it's live so they know that it's time to share. So in this example, I did a podcast with Chris Decker. He writes about being a virtual CEO, and so we talked about that and productivity. And so he's someone who likes really brief emails, so I didn't send the click-to-tweets for him. I sent him the episode recap, and then I sent him the MP3 file, which is something he asked for. You might send that as well if you think that your guests would appreciate that over a click-to-tweet or in addition to it. And then I also sent him the subscription link to our iTunes page because he asked for it. So that's something, those are 3 things that you could also include in your email. So in the previous example that I had with Jim, I could have done the click-to-tweet and then the recap post and then maybe the link to subscribe on iTunes. And so it's just kind of giving your guests a lot of options for them to decide how they want to further connect with your podcast and how to share it. You'll also see in this email to Chris, I also followed up with him and let him know that I used one of his suggestions that we had in a conversation after the podcast recording was over, and thanked him for his time. And so it's always important to kind of have that personal touch, maybe something specific in the podcast that you talked about, something like with the Jim Banks example, I said I'll see you at PubCon because I knew we'd both be at PubCon Las Vegas this October. So just kind of building that relationship by kind of following up with things that you talked about. Maybe if Chris' wife had just had a baby, I could have asked about that. Just kind of growing that relationship organically is really important, and it shows that you care about them without being salesy or pushy, because I do genuinely want to build these connections with the guests that I'm having on Marketing Nerds. So another thing that I found really useful that not a lot of people are doing, surprisingly, is tagging guests in social media sharing. So you would think that this would be common sense, to tag in Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, but I found that a lot of podcasts aren't taking full advantage of that whenever they're sharing their content. So here's another example with Chris Ducker again. So on our Marketing Nerds Facebook page, we have a separate one that's separate of the Search Engine Journal Facebook page. We shared the cover photo image of me and Chris's podcast. So you'll see in the example, I tagged his Facebook page, which is also his name because he's known as a thought leader. And so I did a quote from him and tagged his Facebook page. That's the first green arrow. And then I also tagged his personal Facebook account. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for everyone. You might look at the person's Facebook account first and make sure that they share business stuff. I know that some people like to keep their Facebook personal only. So if you do have access to their profile, I'd recommend making sure that that would be okay to share. With Chris's case, he usually only shares business stuff on Facebook, so I knew it'd be okay. So I tagged him in the photo that we shared. The image is him. I tagged him under his personal profile. And you'll see the second green arrow, he liked it. So that gave us 2 opportunities to appear to his network. First, the tag for the page, which the Facebook page then allowed to show on their newsfeed. So the chrisducker.com Facebook page now is showing this update from the Marketing Nerds page. And then also when Chris liked the update and I tagged him on his personal profile, it then appears in his newsfeed and appears to his friends, which since he has a business profile, I can figure that most of his friends are probably business colleagues, and so hopefully that's going to garner some interest with them and get them listening not only to the episode, but then also maybe listening to further episodes, asking to be a guest, things like that. So just thinking about how you can tag different people that you have on social networks. And so I know that this example is only for Facebook, but don't forget about Twitter and Google+. They allow tagging as well. One thing that's worked really well for us too with webinars and podcasts at Search Engine Journal is we'll also tag the person's company. So if we, for instance, with the Jim Banks example, whenever we sent out a tweet about his podcast, we could have also said, at Jim Banks of, at Cheapo Flights or whatever their Twitter handles are. And so that's also alerting the company that the podcast with their employee is live. And so hopefully the company Twitter profile, which is usually pretty big depending on how well known the brand is, they're going to retweet it and share it too. So that's just a little hidden way to kind of, get more exposure for your content just by telling people that they're on it or their employees are on it. Another thing that I really like to use guests for, or not really use, but kind of take advantage of, I guess, is to ask them for recommendations for future guests. So that goes back to the idea of birds of a feather flock together. So, once you kind of build a rapport with the people you have on your podcast, you could say, hey, hey Jim, I know we did a podcast about PPC. I'm really looking for a guest to talk specifically about mobile PPC. Do you have anyone in mind you could introduce me to? And that kind of opens the door, hopefully, to some other thought leaders that you can have on your podcast. And because it's a personal recommendation from someone they know, they'll be more likely to say yes. And so I try to facilitate those relationships, going back to what I said about the emails, to make sure that I can, ask for recommendations and I'm getting to know people and growing my own network. So it's not weird or salesy or pushy to ask them to recommend me to their colleagues or their friends that they think would be good guests. So that brings us to the next poll question.
All right, so the last poll we're going to do is where do you get new podcast guests? Select one of the following for us. Ask people in my network, cold pitch people I think I look up to, and from referrals or word of mouth. Again, where do you get your podcast guests from? You ask people in your network, or you cold pitch people that you look up to, or you reach out for referrals or from word of mouth. And we'll let this go a little bit longer. Get a couple more votes in if we can. And awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. Mostly it looks like we get people asking people in their network, which makes sense. You know, you're looking at people that, you know, are going to accept quickly. One thing, you know, I'll just mention, you know, kind of throw in there is that you have nothing to lose by to reaching out to people. We've gotten people from Google, you know, we've gotten some really, really great guests to join our podcast just by simply saying, you know what? I'm just going to ask this person, and believe it or not, most people are just normal people, and they love to, you know, to say yes when you ask. So definitely take the risk and just ask anybody and everybody that you think would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed by how many people say yes. You know, SEJ is a pretty big publication, Brent, but I've cold pitched people like Ryan Holiday. He's known for the book Growth Hacking, and he said yes. I mean, so you won't know until you ask.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to the second half of the podcast. Talking about the network of your audience. And so I come at this from the angle of making your audience advocates for your content. You want to make it natural and easy and second nature for them to share your podcast episodes, your content, to have them talk about it to their friends. And so coming at it from that aspect has really helped us at Marketing Nerds and Search Engine Journal kind of step up our game and make sure that we're offering the content that people want to share and talk about. So related to that is you want to link to mentioned resources on your website and or Twitter. And so whenever we do a recap for every podcast episode, the post goes live on Fridays. And so in those recap posts, we do a list of all the resources that we mentioned in the podcast. So that gives the listeners a really easy way to find more information about maybe a book that we mentioned, a website tool, a platform if we said that it's good for research, things like that. We also occasionally send out tweets, again, tagging that company. So if, say, you know, we mentioned BuzzSumo or Searchmetrics or something like that, we could then, when the episode went live, we could say, hey, check out this podcast episode about content curation and research with recommendations for tools like BuzzSumo and Searchmetrics, and tag them on that. And that's, again, bringing companies' attention to your podcast content, which hopefully will help grow your reach and listens and even your network to get better guests on. Another thing that I would recommend too is, you know, listing these resources is helping set your podcast up as a thought leader in your industry. So sometimes going above and beyond what was just mentioned in the episode can also help as well. So for instance, if we talked about a really complex topic like, I don't know, native search engines or something, and we wanted to list, you know, advanced books about maybe analytics or search that we didn't get a chance to talk about, linking to those in the recap post is a good way to say to our audience, hey, you know, here's a podcast about a really advanced topic. If you want to learn more, we'd also recommend, you know, these websites, these other podcasts, these books we really like, these tools that we didn't get to talk about. And that's, you know, making your podcast and your website that the recap posts are published on a thought leader, a one-stop destination resource. You know, we want Marketing Nerds to be the marketing podcast that people are going to have to listen to. They know that as long as they listen to Marketing Nerds and read the recap post, they're getting all the information they need. And so that's what we strive to do with our podcast topics and guests. And so I think the audience appreciates that they're going to get a well-rounded source of information no matter what your topic is. Another thing that has really helped us define what our audience is looking for and seeing if they're sharing our podcast is tracking referral sources. So there's lots of little kind of not really thought about ways to track referral sources or track specific ones that I know not a lot of podcast producers are thinking about. Something specifically could be networking events, conferences, email share buttons, sweepstakes. Those things maybe don't come first of mind when you're looking at analytics to see who's listening, where they're getting links, but you want to pay attention to them. I want to talk specifically about email too, because email is one form of word of mouth, which, as I mentioned earlier, podcasts are usually spread by a lot of times is word of mouth, and email is a digital version of that. So I wanted to share an example of kind of a cold referral that wouldn't normally have tracking on it. So this example isn't really about podcasts, but bear with me. So I have my cousin and two of my friends. We're trying to get healthier, so we send each other websites that we really like or food that we like. And so in this example, I sent them two links to home pages of fruit bars that I have found that are really healthy and that I like. And so you'll see I just shared their root domain URL. Well, I wasn't sharing, a bit.ly link that they could track. I wasn't sharing a specific product page that they could track at a higher level. I'm just sharing the root domain. Well, if you want to see if people are sharing your podcast root domain, you can go into the referral source section of analytics and see if you're getting any traffic from email servers. And that, I guess, too, that can go beyond your root domain. If you're getting any traffic to any of your podcast URLs from email clients like Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, you know that people are sharing your content through email. And that helps us know that, the word of mouth is getting out there, is spreading. We also have buttons set up for SEJ to track email shares and text shares through mobile. And so that gives us a good idea kind of that natural word of mouth that maybe is harder to track through social media. And tracking sharing is really important when it comes to podcasts, because then it gives you a better idea as to what podcast topics and episodes are shared the most. For instance, in Marketing Nerds, we know that episodes about search obviously do the best, since we're called Search Engine Journal, and so we try to make sure that we have regular SEO and search, paid search topics on Marketing Nerds regularly. Another thing that I wanted to touch on about leveraging your audience networks is repurposing content. So when I say that, you might be thinking, well, how does repurposing content equal advocates for your, making your audience advocates for your podcast? Well, there's a couple points. So first, by repurposing your content and translating it into several different mediums like audio, video, text, you're making it as easy as possible for them to consume and share. So this idea comes from the book Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. It's really popular with our staff. A lot of us have read it. And basically the idea is, can they share your content with their eyes closed? Are you making it as easy as possible for them to share your podcast content or your content as a whole in a format that they find interesting or they learn from best? As most people know, there's different types of learners, like audio, visual, and then tactile. And so if you create additional content through repurposing from your original podcast audio, that's helping reach more people, which is going to help grow your audience. Another point that I want to make up that I mentioned earlier is going above and beyond makes you stand out. So, tons of people are releasing podcasts on iTunes and then maybe sharing it on social. A much fewer number are transcribing their podcast into a recap post, which is what we do at SEJ. So one example that I really like is John Loomer. He's a blogger that does advanced Facebook marketing. That's mainly what he talks about. So in his long-form blog posts, he also does podcast audio versions. So you'll see in this example where the green box is, if you don't want to read this long post, which he has really long posts on his blog, you can listen to it. And then the buttons show that you can also download it into an MP3, maybe then I could put it on my my phone and listen to it in the car while I'm working out, or you can share the audio version instantly. And so just giving readers that option to listen to it instead is really going to help John and any other marketers make sure that their audience is consuming the content in the way that they want. Other ideas for repurposing content, I know I mentioned transcription. We use rev.com. It's $1 per minute of written transcription, and they're really fast. We enjoy using them. You can also take the topics from your podcast and turn it into other formats, other types of content, like webinars. So we really enjoy doing the think tank webinars here at SEJ because it's providing a more interactive format. So if you have a specific podcast episode that you know would do well with an interactive format where people could ask questions, then you might consider turning it into a webinar and maybe delving into one aspect deeper or bringing in an additional expert to talk about it. Things like that are going to help you repurpose your podcast audience to reach a greater number of people and help them, you know, become advocates for the content that you're producing, because at the end of the day, that's what's important. You want people to share the content that you're producing and putting out there. So in order to make that sharing as easy as possible, again, going back to Don't Make Me Think, you want to use an easy share podcast platform. So the three most popular hosting platforms based on my research were Blueberry, which is what we use, Libsyn, which is probably by far the most popular, and then Podbean is another smaller one that's still pretty popular. They all have embeddable players that you can put right into a blog post that lets people play the episode or share it immediately from that player. And that makes it really easy for them to share as soon as they're done listening, or maybe they want to share first and then listen later, and they could download the episode from the player. Just offering those options are going to make your audience appreciative, and making things easy to use is going to grow those listens and grow that organic content. I cannot talk today. So here's an example of making interaction as easy as possible. This is what we do at Search Engine Journal. So we have a landing page that's all of our Marketing Nerds podcasts on one page. And so you can see in this example, Brent, our lovely moderator today, he did a podcast with Marty Weintraub. And so it has a brief kind of descriptor sentence of what they talk about. And then you'll see we did a personalized kind of player on this landing page. So you'll see the options that are there. Listen, so they can listen just like with the John Loomer example right from that page. They don't even have to click to the recap post, which is what the title links to. They can download the episode, again, download the MP3 version, and then they can also subscribe to the RSS feed. And so they can be notified as soon as new episodes are available. We also have these social share buttons. So instead of having to find this recap post, click on it, and then click on the share buttons on there, all they have to do is go to the landing page with all the episodes and then click the share button and it's shared. I do that a lot if I need to fill up my buffer queue. Sometimes I'll go to the landing page and just share a couple of old Marketing Nerds episodes on my own personal Twitter, LinkedIn, and that's kind of resharing them again, but it's a really easy way to give your audience not only a one-stop shop for multiple episodes that they could listen to all from one page, but also is giving them a way to easily share your content from one central page. So to wrap things up, I have 3 takeaways that I want to make sure you guys know as we end today. You want to let your guests promote your podcast. So, you know, sending them the links, sending them the subscription links, doing the click to tweets, you know, making it simple and making it, you know, really current. As soon as the episode goes live, you're telling them that it's live so they can share it. And that goes into the second point, making sharing as easy as possible, both for your guests and your audience. Share buttons everywhere they could be, you know, download and play buttons everywhere they could be. You know, tagging in social media so people and their companies know that this content is out there. Just thinking of ways that you can get the content out there by making sharing easy. And then finally, repurposed content reaches more people. So consider transcription for your podcast. Consider doing a webinar series based on some of your most popular episodes. Maybe you could do video versions of podcasts and experiment with that. Having a YouTube channel or growing your native Facebook presence. There's tons of things that you could do with that repurposed content when it comes to podcasts. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much for listening. I, again, really appreciate your time, and I hope you learned something, and I look forward to your questions.
Awesome, Kelsey. Thank you so much for all that information. It was really, really great. Just want to throw a quick plug out there. Speaking of great information, we are going to have another podcast on January 6th, 2016, our first one of the year. It's going to be about, are you really reaching your audience? See, I said podcast and not webinar. That's how brainwashed I am.
I didn't even notice either.
It's a webinar, sorry. Are you really reaching your audience? And it's with Erin Everhart, who's from Home Depot, and she spoke at one of our SCJ summits and had one of the most popular presentations. Was an amazing speaker. I had to go tell her right afterwards. I was really, really impressed by how well she spoke. So we coaxed her into coming on and doing a webinar for us. So I think it's going to be really good. And I'd like to make sure everybody put that in your calendar and make sure you see that. We do have time for Q&A. I have a number of questions that have come through, but I do welcome if anybody has any other questions. Please, make sure to throw them in there. As we mentioned, if you're putting them up on Twitter, use the hashtag SCJ Think Tank, or put them into the webinar system. Real quick question: when you're using the sharing platforms, do the sharing platforms generate an RSS feed to copy and paste? Or how do you have to create that yourself, or do they create one for you?
It's usually automatically created. I know with Blueberry and Libsyn, they are, because I use Libsyn for my new podcast, my personal one I'm still working on. And so I know with that and Blueberry, it's automatic. And so all you have to do is go into the player or go into the back end, and it's already going to be there for you. For SCJ, I think Vahan, our developer, did a custom version like he did with the buttons on the landing page, and so that's custom. But if you can't do that or you don't want to, there are automatic options from hosting providers, at least with Libsyn and Blueberry.
Okay, so next question. What do you think about sharing your podcast, asking your guests to share it for you? I guess this is kind of in reference to earlier on, you were talking about you could mention their names, you could mention them and so forth, but what do you think about actually just asking them, hey, can you share this to your audience?
So I think people, at least for marketers, which I know probably a lot of you guys that are listening, your podcast probably isn't about marketing, but marketers like to talk about themselves. And so that's probably something that goes beyond just marketers and just goes into human nature. And so I found that when I ask people to share the podcast that they were on, they want to share it because it concerns them and it talks about something they did. And so I found that it's pretty easy to ask people to share. I don't know if the question asker wants to know just in general. Like if I just emailed Chris Ducker and I said, hey, can you mention our podcast on your Twitter feed? I haven't really done that with anyone yet because I just feel like it's not really organic and it kind of gets a little salesy, and I don't want to capitalize on the higher profile guests we have and make them feel like we're trying to take advantage of them or all we care about is their network. And so I probably wouldn't do that, but asking them to share the episode that they're on, or even sharing an episode that relates to what they talked about in their podcast with me, I think that would probably work a lot better than just asking in general.
Yeah, I think they were referencing to the podcast that people were mentioned in, like the Chris Ducker example, right? Like saying to him, I mean, my take on that would be, you have the click to tweet stuff. I mean, if you can find a subtle language to say, like, here's the links so that you can share them, with your audience, I think that would be a nice twist of being able to kind of subtly suggest that they could share it with their audiences without necessarily having to say, can you share it with your audiences?
Yeah, exactly.
How can you grow your podcast audience via Twitter? I guess there's just, do you have any basic quick tips that you would give somebody on how to grow the audience through Twitter?
One thing that I didn't touch on in this presentation, and it's another thing we do for Search Engine Journal and Marketing Nerds, is every Friday when the recap post goes live, we kind of live tweet the podcast. So we'll include maybe quotes that the guest said or key facts or tips, and we'll schedule those kind of throughout the day. And so we'll say, did you know that eBay has its own search engine and it indexed millions of products per day, or whatever it was, because we had Dan Fain from eBay on, and then you could say, learn more on Marketing Nerds and give the URL. A shortened version of that would fit in Twitter, but kind of live tweeting it, maybe if your podcast has a hashtag or you hashtag words in the tweet like marketing or search or whatever, that might be a good way to kind of get more exposure out there. Just kind of being active in the community. Maybe there's an industry Twitter chat you could use and then kind of mention your podcast. Like if they ask a question about a topic that you already did an episode on, you could say, hey, we already had someone from, Home Depot on our podcast to talk about woodworking, and I know that's what you're asking about, so here's the link. Kind of naturally bringing up your podcast on Twitter can help grow the traffic and then grow your own Twitter account as well.
And then I would also say the click to tweet stuff, if you have with your guests, to like kind of tap into some of their network as well. I mean, I think a big point that you make is like you should set up some monitoring, around topics that you have and like really look for those opportunities to kind of reference people to your podcast. People, they like video and audio for learning. It's a very, positive kind of, format. It's very subtle. It's not hard to like engage. It's not hard on the eyes, and it's portable. So I think that's a really good way as well.
Yeah, good point.
One of the question askers, one of the audience members, wants to know, how do you get your listeners to rate and review in iTunes? So she's asking them like, hey, if you like the podcast, please go and give me a good rating, but she's not getting a lot of response from it. Just asking doesn't seem to be working as well. So any tips or any ideas you can think of on how do you get people to review and rate your podcast?
That's a really good question. I know when we first launched Marketing Nerds, we did what the question asker said. We asked everyone at SEJ and some of our colleagues that we work with a lot to listen and then give an honest review. And I know you're saying that doesn't work. It's hard because my first thought is to say, well, maybe you could make it worth their while, and I don't know if that's against iTunes terms of service, so you'd have to check on that, but maybe you could do a giveaway. If you leave us a review, you'll be entered in our monthly giveaway for an Amazon gift card. Again, I don't know if that's against iTunes terms of service, but you could say it can be an honest review, and you want to make sure that people are giving honest reviews. So, when I look at a podcast in iTunes and I see like 500 five-star reviews, I kind of get suspicious because I feel like nobody is going to think that, that many people are not going to think something's perfect. So honest reviews are way better than wanting someone to just give you a 5-star review across the board. So maybe you could do a giveaway. Maybe you can make it part of your promotion strategy for your guests. Whenever you send them the click to tweets, you could say, hey, and if you enjoyed your experience on Marketing Nerds, we would love it if you would give us a review in iTunes. We live or die by those reviews. We love having reviews. Either way, you can list it anonymous, we'd love it. Here's the link. And give the direct link to leave a review, and just making asking part of your regular routine versus just asking once and it didn't really work and trying to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and I think that you have to understand where people are at in the cycle of their experience with you. When they're listening to a podcast, a lot of times they're listening, right? They're involved. But I think that emphasizing the value of what it does for you, a lot of people, they don't think about that, right? You're just like, hey, give me a review, give me a rating. But to say something like, look, I could really use a couple extra good, ratings or good reviews if you really like the show. It helps us to rank better. It helps us to get included in the categories. It means something specific to me. I think that when people realize there's meaning in that, it's kind of like the same thing. You see a lot of these like charities, or you see a lot of the like vote for me to win an award, right? If you
Yeah.
say, hey, go vote for me, nobody does it. But if you're like, hey, I'm within 15 votes of winning, can you guys help me out? Then people feel like their action actually has an impact, and they're more likely to do it. So by creating some sense of urgency or some sense of like my action has an impact, I think will help a lot for getting people to follow through.
Yeah, that's a really good idea because you could say, we're only 5 away from having 100 reviews on iTunes, and once we get 100 reviews, we'll do a giveaway on our Facebook page. Maybe you could use the giveaways that way. So saying, we're only 5 away, give us a review to reach 100 reviews, we'd really appreciate it. That's a good idea for sure.
Uh, Interesting question, totally unrelated, but have you listened to the new Serial podcast yet?
Of course I have. It's awesome. I wasn't sure about this season because it's about such a well-known case, and I'm a super creep, and I like true crime and murder stuff, and so the first season really appealed to me. But this case is really interesting because it's about Bowie Bergdahl, who left his post, and so the first episode explains kind of in his words why, but it's just really interesting. It got me hooked again, and so it is really good. Somebody else recommended to me through word of mouth that there's a podcast called Criminal, and if you like Serial, you would really like Criminal. Instead of having one case over several episodes, it's one case per episode, and it's pretty good. I enjoy that one too,
I'll have
so
to
check
make
it
note of
out.
that. I'll have to
Yeah.
make note of that one. I actually do not listen to Serial. I did the first couple. It's definitely interesting. It's just if I'm going to dedicate a certain amount of time, it's not going to be for something like that. Just my personal preference, and I refuse to do the second one because I'm a vet and I have a different understanding of what it means to join the military and what it means to your fellow vets when you're there, and so I have a different view, and it doesn't allow me to view it the same way.
Yeah, I could see that. That's probably why it's such a heated topic too.
Well, people don't
Um,
understand. You lose when you sign up for the military. You give up all your constitutional rights. You're no longer, under the Constitution. You're under the Geneva Conventions, other, restrictions. So it's a different environment, and the way you react is not the same as a regular citizen would react. You don't have the same rights. So
that makes sense. Do you
anyway,
listen to any podcasts, Brent?
um, I listen to ours. I download quite a few futurism ones. I listen to quite a few futurism ones. That's what I'm really excited about. I want to hear, scientists talking about how it just, proved time travel again for the second time, and what's the implications on how that's going to work for the future. Quantum mechanics. Things that are progressing us forward, augmented reality. All those type of things that start to portray the future of society and the future of how we deal with things. I'm really big into basic human incomes and discussions around stuff like that. So I listen to a lot of podcasts that relate to that type of stuff.
Cool. I like history. I don't like reading history. I like listening. So I love stuff you should know, I think it's stuff your mom didn't tell you. Um, those are really, really good. I listen to a couple other marketing ones. Our SEJ founder, Lauren Baker, has one called Search and Social. I listen to that's pretty good. I was recently on Copy Bloggers podcast, Malcontent. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty good. There's so many to choose from, and so
Yeah.
I think part of being a podcaster too is at least listening. I know, Brent, you said you don't listen a lot, but just kind of being aware of what other people are doing in the space and what people are talking about in your industry. If there's another podcast in your industry, even if you think it's crappy, just occasionally checking up on it, I think is a really good idea to help stay current.
What do you think is the should be the average length of an audio podcast? What's too short? What's too long?
We have struggled with that a lot with marketing nerds. So when we started out, our target was 15 minutes. Now some of ours go for, 20 to 45 minutes. I think it's just something you have to kind of experiment with. One thing I've learned is if you're really vibing with a guest, like maybe you knew them before, excuse me, or you guys just really hit it off, like Dino Dogan, he's one of the founders of Triber. Him and I just have a really good rapport, and so I've done 2 podcasts with him, and they went a little bit longer. They went about, I think, 30 minutes because we just naturally had a really good conversation. And so I think that that's probably more important than trying to stick to a time limit. But usually with marketing nerds, they're about 15 to 20 minutes. Just
Yeah, and
depending.
when she talks about 45 minutes, she's pointing the finger at me because a lot of mine go 45 minutes. Like the one this Friday, I couldn't help it. That's the one that we have coming out this Friday is with Robert Arsenic Hansen, who's one of the top hackers in the world. Like he's a world-renowned hacker. He's the guy who found Hillary Clinton's email servers. I mean, he's been involved. He was the guy who created Slow Loris that brought down the Iranian government in 2009. I mean, he's just. You start talking to somebody like that about publishers and web security and stuff, and he's just like going on and on about all these security things. It's before you know it, you're like you have to cut it off at 45 minutes. It's like
Yeah.
It's getting too long. But
well, and then our Christmas Spectacular, which is what I titled it, our Christmas episode of Marketing Nerds with you, me, and Lauren. I had to cut that one off because I know we rehashed some of the trending topics for search and social and marketing in 2015, and so I think that one went like 30 or 40 minutes just because we all get along so well, and it was just natural to go longer. So I think definitely experimenting and seeing like what gets more downloads and listens for you.
I think it really comes down to substance. If you can do a 5-minute podcast and it gives substance, like you're just talking about one topic, and I think 5 minutes a topic is really good. So typically when we plan for our 15 to 20 minutes, we're looking at 3 to 4 questions. So when you're thinking about it, I think one topic point, 5 minutes. Give 20 minutes for 3 topic points to plan for a little back and forth and a little over. But I think that's good. And what do you think, about how often to do them? Weekly, monthly, same time, same day, every week, every month. What about the consistency and how often?
I think consistency is more important than frequency, if that makes sense. So for us, we have new episodes every Friday. I mean, even through the holidays, like I said, we're going to have a Christmas episode because podcasts can be listened to on demand. So, our listeners know every Friday there's a new episode. I think that is important because you want people to start depending on you. With Serial, I forget what day of the week it comes out. I want to say like Wednesday. People look forward to it, Like last season, I would be texting my friends, "Have you listened to it yet? It's on. The episode's on iTunes. I've been refreshing iTunes. It's there. It's there." So you want to create like that need for it, and so you want to make sure that whatever schedule you stick to, or whatever schedule you decide you stick to. So whether that's weekly, monthly, I know like Entrepreneur on Fire with John Dumas, his is every day. So it just depends on what you can handle, what you want to do, and then sticking to it.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. We were talking about networks and identifying and connecting with people, so I'm just going to ask one more question here, and I think we'll kind of wrap up after that. What do you think about analyzing potential guests? Let's say, for instance, I had 10 different guests that I could invite, and I went through and I looked at how many of these people actually are sharing and talking about themselves to their audiences. How many people have done an interview and they've shared it on their Twitter accounts and their stuff, so that I know that they're going to be somebody who's going to promote it, and to look at their audience size. So I have one guest who maybe has 1,000 followers and they don't really talk too much on their account, and another guy has 25,000 followers and they constantly share their stuff, and making a decision based on that. What do you think about that kind of research and that kind of decision making?
I think it's important because at the end of the day, you want to have people on your podcast that are thought leaders in your industry and are active and sharing their knowledge. And so I'm sure that all the guests we've had on Marketing Nerds, in the year, over a year now of how long we've had it, I'm sure not all of them have like really active Twitter accounts or really active on social, but we try to go after people that are sharing and doing great things in the industry. And so, researching their social, seeing what they've written about, maybe they've have really good content on their blog or have guest posted for well-known sites. If I look personally a lot at authors, so I'll literally go to Amazon and type in marketing and like look for books that maybe I've heard of or I'll remember. I'm like, oh yeah, I read that book a couple years ago. It was awesome. I should ask the author to be on. Seeing what the reviews are for those books, that's another great way, because I found too, authors are usually a lot more likely to be on as well because they want to promote their books. Promotion is part of what helps book sales. So if you know of someone who has a new book coming out, like we did, Brent did a podcast with Jay Baer, and he has a new book coming out called Hug Your Haters, and so they did a podcast about that. That was an easy yes for Jay, I would assume, because it's right about the time he wants to promote his book, and he can come on and talk about that really cool concept of hugging your haters, and he gets a book plug. So
Yes.
thinking about how they're active in the industry, if they're thought leaders, and then what's in it for them too, because at the end of the day, people will go out of their way to do something if it's helping them. And so when you do pitch them, you want to make sure you frame it as like, so for me, I say, Marketing Nerds is growing. We have over 5,000 unique downloads per month now. SEJ has over 1 million page views per month. Letting them know that the exposure they'll get, and then mentioning past guests has helped.
Yes, yeah, you do the authors. The one I do is like TED Talks, like when I see somebody who's doing like a really like edgy kind of things. But I think one of the big things that I would suggest to people who are looking at looking at guests is find people that make you excited, like that you are personally excited to talk to.
Yes.
Every person that I go to and I try to connect with, it's somebody that I'm really excited to talk to. I'm really excited to learn. I have questions that I really want to ask, and I want to know the answers to. I think that it's transparent when it comes through to your audience. It kind of has that same level, and I think it also makes your guest feel more welcomed. So I think that's another thing to really look at. So unfortunately, we're out of time. I really want to thank you again, Kelsey, for your presentation. It's really helpful. We have a couple extra questions. We will get those to Kelsey. We'll make sure that they get out on Twitter. If you have questions, continue to ask them. Continue to use the hashtag SEJThinkTank on Twitter, and we will include them in the recap post. I'm sure Kelsey will be around to answer a couple more questions on Twitter as well live, but we'll make sure all of that gets back into the recap post. So if you have questions, we'll get you an answer. Again, we're going to throw out a quick survey once this is all over. Please stick around and fill that survey out. As I was mentioning earlier when we were talking about getting ratings and reviews, we need 5 more survey answers to really understand if this show is great. So give us your survey answers. Help us out. And, until next time, we bid you farewell.
Thank you. Bye.